When 16-year-old Marcus found a bloodied motorcycle captain lying on the highway, he had no idea the patch on that leather jacket would change everything, because the man he was about to save wasn't just any biker. He was a Hells Angels captain who never forgets a debt. What started as a simple act of kindness on a lonely road became something much bigger when Marcus showed up to that diner the next day, surrounded by leather and chrome, face to face with one of the most feared motorcycle clubs in America. But when a hardened biker captain looks a homeless teenager in the eye and says, "Name your price," what could a kid who has nothing possibly ask for that would matter? The highway stretches like a black ribbon through the heart of nowhere, where broken yellow lines disappear into fog, and the only sound is the whisper of wind through tall grass that bends and sways like the world is holding its breath. Marcus Delano walks along the cracked shoulder of Route 47, his worn Converse sneakers finding every pothole, every jagged piece of asphalt that seems designed to remind him that even the road doesn't want him here. The plastic grocery bag clutched in his left hand contains everything he owns: a change of clothes that smell like the industrial detergent they use at Riverside Group Home, a toothbrush missing half its bristles, $17 in crumpled bills that represent 3 weeks of saving lunch money, and a photograph of his mother that he keeps meaning to throw away but never can. The edges soft from years of handling. The group home is 12 miles behind him now, and with every step, the memory of Derek's fists connecting with his ribs and the sound of Ms. Patterson's tired voice saying, "Maybe it's just not working out." Marcus grows smaller in the rear-view mirror of his mind. He can still taste the copper of blood from his split lip, still feel the ache in his shoulder where Derek had slammed him against the bathroom wall while the other kids pretended not to see, pretended not to hear. Marcus gasping for breath on the tile floor. "Nobody wants you here anyway," Derek had whispered, his breath hot against Marcus's ear. "You're just another throwaway kid waiting to age out and disappear." The September air carries the scent of dying leaves and something else, the bittersweet taste of freedom and terror in equal parts. Marcus has been walking since dawn when the morning mist clung to the ground like ghosts, and the only witnesses to his departure were the security cameras that probably stopped working years ago. The sun hangs low and orange in the sky now, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. That would be beautiful if he had the luxury of noticing beauty. But beauty is for people who have homes to return to, people who don't carry their entire lives in a worn satchel, people who have never spent Christmas morning in the facility's common room, pretending that donated toys from strangers feel the same as presents from family. His stomach growls, a hollow sound that echoes the emptiness in his chest where hope used to live before it got beaten out of him by foster fathers who drank too much and social workers who moved too fast, and kids like Derek who understood that the only way to feel powerful in a powerless situation is to find someone weaker to crush. Marcus thinks about the bologna sandwich he didn't eat at lunch, how he'd wrapped it in a napkin and stuffed it in his backpack before remembering that his backpack is probably being searched right now by Ms. Patterson, who's trying to figure out what she missed, what signs she should have seen that would have prevented another runner from her facility. The sound of his footsteps on gravel creates a rhythm that matches his heartbeat, steady, determined, heading towards something he can't name because he's never had it before. Each step takes him further from the suffocating routine of group home life, from morning chores and evening check-ins and Mrs. Rodriguez's pitying glances every time she handed out mail that never included his name. Each step takes him closer to an undefined but essential destination, something that feels like breathing. After spending 16 years underwater, a motorcycle approaches from behind, its engine growling like some massive predator waking from sleep, and Marcus steps further onto the shoulder, not looking back, because he's learned that eye contact invites trouble, and trouble is the last thing he needs when he's got nowhere left to run. The bike passes in, a blur of chrome and black leather. The rider leaning into the curb ahead, where the road bends between two hills covered in pine trees that reach toward the sky, like dark green prayers. The sound fades to nothing, leaving only the whisper of wind through grass and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. And Marcus allows himself a moment to imagine what it would feel like to have that kind of power between his legs, that kind of freedom to go anywhere, to be anyone, to leave the past in the dust and never look back. The scream of tires on asphalt shatters the quiet like a gunshot, followed by the sickening crunch of metal against stone that makes Marcus's blood turn to ice water because he knows that sound, has heard it in nightmares about the accident that took his parents when he was 8 years old and turned him into a permanent resident of the state system. He drops his belongings without thinking and runs toward the curve, his sneakers slapping against the pavement as adrenaline floods his system and makes everything sharp and clear and immediate. The sound of his own breathing fills his ears, harsh and ragged, mixing with the echo of impact that seems to hang in the air like smoke. Around the bend, 20 yards ahead, he sees the motorcycle twisted against the guardrail like a broken toy, steam rising from its engine in ghostly wisps that catch the fading sunlight and transform it into something otherworldly. The bike is beautiful, even in its destruction, all chrome and black paint, and curves that speak of speed and power, and the kind of craftsmanship that costs more money than Marcus has ever seen in one place. But beyond it, sprawled on the yellow centerline like a discarded doll, a rider in dark colors, lies motionless, except for the slow rise and fall of his chest that suggests life, persisting despite everything that physics and momentum try to do to extinguish it. Marcus stops running and starts moving carefully, moving with the caution foster homes had taught him, where the wrong footstep at the wrong time could mean the difference between dinner and going hungry, between a quiet evening and a night spent hiding in closets while adults screamed at each other in voices that carried the weight of their own broken dreams. The man is older than Marcus initially thought, maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail secured by a leather cord, and a beard streaked with silver and now dark with blood that seeps from a cut somewhere near his scalp. His leather jacket is torn at the shoulder, revealing a tattoo that snakes down his arm, an eagle with wings spread wide, clutching a banner that Marcus can't quite read from this angle. The ink dark against skin that's been weathered by decades of sun and wind and whatever experiences shape men who choose to live their lives on motorcycles. The jacket itself is a work of art, soft leather, worn to the perfect patina that only comes from years of use, decorated with patches and pins that tell stories. Marcus doesn't know how to read. "Hey," Marcus calls out, his voice cracking slightly in the way that betrays his youth despite his best efforts to sound capable and mature. "Hey, can you hear me?" The man's eyes flutter open, storm weather and surprisingly alert, eyes like steel shot through with lightning, and he tries to sit up before gasping and falling back against the pavement, his face contorting with pain that he's clearly trying to hide behind a mask of stoic endurance. The sound he makes is half grunt, half sigh, the kind of noise men make when they're hurt, but don't want to admit it. When showing weakness feels more dangerous than pretending everything's fine. "Easy," Marcus says, kneeling beside him now, close enough to smell leather and motor oil and the metallic scent of blood and fear, close enough to see the lines carved around the man's eyes by decades of squinting into sunlight and wind. "Don't move too much. You took a pretty hard spill." The asphalt is warm against Marcus's knees, still holding the heat of the day, and he can feel small stones digging into his skin through the worn denim of his jeans. But he ignores the discomfort because this stranger's weathered features remind him of his father, not in features, but in pain and determination, wearing for control of his expression. The man looks at Marcus with that penetrating stare, studying him like he's trying to solve a puzzle or read a map written in a language he's still learning. And Marcus feels exposed, like this stranger can see every secret, every fear, every night he spent wondering if anyone would notice, if he just disappeared into the anonymous darkness between towns. "You're just a kid," the man says, his voice rough as sandpaper, but carrying an undertone of something that might be concern or surprise or both. "What are you doing out here by yourself?" Marcus feels heat rise in his cheeks because the question hits too close to truths he's not ready to share with a stranger. Bleeding on a highway. Truths about group homes and foster families and how the system grinds through kids like him until they're 18 and officially not anyone's problem anymore. "I was walking," he says, which is technically accurate, even if it doesn't begin to explain the complex series of failures and disappointments that led him to this particular stretch of nowhere. "I heard the crash. The bike," the man whispers, his voice taking on an urgent quality that cuts through the pain. "Is she totaled?" Marcus glances over at the motorcycle, sees the twisted handlebars and the spiderweb crack running through the headlight like a frozen lightning bolt, notices the way the front wheel sits at an angle that suggests things bent that shouldn't bend, and knows enough about machines from his brief stint in auto shop class to know this one won't be carrying anyone anywhere for a while. The bike represents thousands of dollars and probably years of careful maintenance and modification, the kind of machine that becomes an extension of its rear's identity. And Marcus can see in the man's eyes that losing it would be like losing a piece of himself. "It's pretty banged up," Marcus says gently, trying to find words that acknowledge the reality without crushing whatever hope might be keeping the man conscious. "But bikes can be fixed. People are harder to replace." The man laughs, a sound that starts deep in his chest, but turns into a cough that brings up fleck sacks of blood that dot his beard like red stars. And Marcus feels panic rising in his throat like bile because he's seen enough medical dramas to know that coughing up blood is never a good sign, never something that resolves itself without professional intervention. "I need to call someone," the man says urgently, trying to reach toward his jacket pocket before the movement sends fresh waves of pain across his face. "My phone. There's numbers in there. People who need to know what happened." Marcus sees the cell phone scattered across the asphalt 15 feet away. It screens, spiderwebbed, but still glowing with the persistent electronic heartbeat that suggests some life remaining. And he crawls over to retrieve it, his jeans scraping against the rough pavement and collecting oil stains that he'll never be able to wash out completely. When he turns back, the man is trying to pull himself into a sitting position against the guard rail, and Marcus can see more of the tattoos now, elaborate designs that cover both arms like sleeves, eagles and skulls, and roses intertwined with script lettering that tells stories in languages Marcus doesn't recognize. But it's the patch sewn onto the back of his vest that makes his blood turn to ice water, that transforms this moment from a simple roadside accident into something infinitely more complex and dangerous. A skull with wings spread wide, surrounded by words that seem to burn themselves into his retinas like a brand. "Hell's Angels MC." And underneath, in smaller letters that carry the weight of hierarchy and respect earned through means Marcus doesn't want to imagine. "Captain," the revelation crashes over Marcus like a physical blow because everyone knows about the angels. Everyone's heard the stories whispered in group homes and juvenile detention centers about men who live outside the law, who settle disputes with violence, who make their own rules and enforce them with methods that don't involve courts or lawyers or appeals processes. These are the buggy men of law enforcement, the nightmare that keeps small-town sheriffs awake at night. The kind of people who appear in news stories about drug trafficking and territorial wars and the darker corners of American mythology where democracy ends and something older and more primal takes over. But this man, this captain of one of the most feared motorcycle Clubs in America doesn't look like the monster from the stories. He looks like someone's father, someone's husband, someone who might teach his kids to ride bikes and fix engines and throw a baseball in the backyard on Sunday afternoons. Someone whose worst crime might be speeding on empty highways and loving his motorcycle more than is probably healthy. The disconnect between reputation and reality makes Marcus's head spin, makes him question everything he thought he knew about good and evil, and the lines that separate law-abiding citizens from the people who choose to live outside society's carefully constructed boundaries. The morning arrives with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes everything seem possible and terrifying. At the same time, sunlight streaming through the cracked window of the abandoned gas station where Marcus spent the night, curled up behind a stack of old tires that smell like rubber and broken dreams. He washes his face with cold water from a rusty spigot around back, staring at his reflection in the side mirror of a junked pickup truck, trying to see what Hawk saw yesterday on that highway. Someone who mattered, someone worth remembering. The walk to Miller Road takes 40 minutes through neighborhoods that transition from abandoned storefronts to modest houses, with chain-link fences to something approaching prosperity. And with each step, Marcus feels the weight of the choice he's made, settling deeper into his bones. Betty's Diner sits like a time capsule from the 1950s. All chrome and red vinyl and windows that reflect the morning sun in ways that make it impossible to see inside. Marcus stands across the street for 10 minutes watching ordinary people go in and out. Construction workers grabbing coffee before their shifts, elderly couples sharing breakfast and newspapers, teenagers not much older than him laughing over plates of hash browns and bacon. Normal people living normal lives, and he's about to walk into the middle of it, carrying an invitation from someone who lives so far outside normal that the distance can't be measured in miles. At exactly noon, Marcus pushes through the door and hears the little bell chime his arrival, feels every eye in the place turned toward him with the kind of casual curiosity that small towns perfect through generations of practice. The waitress behind the counter, Betty presumably, though she looks too young for the name, glances up from wiping down coffee cups and gives him the kind of smile that suggests she's used to all kinds walking through her door. "Help you, honey?" she asks, her voice carrying traces of an accent that might be from anywhere south of here. "I'm supposed to meet someone," Marcus says, his voice barely audible above the sizzle of the grill and the low murmur of conversation. "Hawk sent me." The change in the diner's atmosphere is immediate and electric. Conversations pause mid-sentence. Coffee cups freeze halfway to lips, and Betty's smile transforms into something sharper, more assessing. She studies Marcus with eyes that have seen enough of the world to know when someone is exactly who they claim to be, then nods toward a corner booth where a man Marcus hadn't noticed before sits reading a newspaper. The man is maybe 40 with arms like tree trunks, emerging from a sleeveless t-shirt that reveals tattoos covering every inch of skin from wrist to shoulder. Eagles and skulls and words and languages Marcus doesn't recognize, all connected by intricate scrollwork that tells stories he can't begin to read. "You the kid from yesterday?" the man asks without looking up from his paper, and Marcus nods even though he realizes the man can't see him. "Name's Tank. Have a seat." The booth cacks under Tank's weight when he shifts to make room, and Marcus slides in across from him, acutely aware of how small and young he must look in this place that suddenly feels charged with undercurrents he doesn't understand. "Hawk's at the hospital," Tank says, folding his newspaper with deliberate precision. "Cracked ribs, concussion, road rash that'll keep him interesting looking for a while. But he's alive, and according to the doctors, that's because someone got to him fast and knew enough to keep him still until help arrived." Tank's eyes, brown and surprisingly gentle in a face that looks like it's been carved from granite, fix on Marcus with an intensity that makes him want to disappear. That someone being you. Before Marcus can respond, the bell chimes again and 3 more men walk in, their club colors and heavy boots announcing their presence like a thunderclap in the quiet diner. They move with the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having to wonder if they're welcome somewhere. And Marcus watches other customers glance nervously at their watches and suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere. Within minutes, the diner has emptied, except for Betty, who continues wiping down surfaces that are already spotless. And the 5 leather-clad men who now occupy 3 booths near Marcus like protective barriers against the outside world. These are my brothers, Tank says, gesturing toward the newcomers with a wave of his coffee cup. Road Dog, Spinner, Chains, and the ugly one over there is Diesel. The men nod acknowledgement, their faces showing various degrees of curiosity and something that might be respect. And Marcus realizes he's being evaluated according to criteria he can't begin to guess. We heard what you did, Road Dog says, his voice growly from what sounds like decades of cigarettes and whiskey. Took balls, stopping for a stranger on a lonely highway. Took brains knowing how to help without making things worse. The weight of their attention feels like a physical thing, pressing down on Marcus's shoulders until he wants to sink into the vinyl seat and disappear entirely. These men represent everything he's been taught to fear: violence and chaos, and the kind of freedom that comes at a price most people aren't willing to pay. But there's something else in their faces, an expression resembling his mother's proud smile for small victories, like perfect attendance or helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries. I just did what anyone would do, Marcus says quietly. And the silence that follows is so complete, he can hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. No, Tank says finally, leaning forward across the table. Most people would have kept walking. Most people would have figured it wasn't their problem, that getting involved would just complicate their lives in ways they didn't need. You stopped. You helped. You probably saved his life. The words hang in the air between them, heavy with implications. Marcus is only beginning to understand. Thing is, Tank continues, when you save the life of a Hell's Angels captain, that creates what you might call a situation because we take care of our own and we don't forget debts. Chain speaks up from the next booth, his voice carrying traces of an accent that might be Boston or Brooklyn. What Tank's trying to say is, you're under our protection now, whether you want it or not. Anyone messes with you, they mess with us. Anyone tries to hurt you, they answer to the club. The enormity of what they're telling him washes over Marcus like a tide, bringing with it possibilities he's never dared to imagine. Protection, belonging, a family that chooses its members based on loyalty rather than blood or legal documents. But it also brings questions that make his stomach clench with anxiety. Because protection comes with expectations, and expectations can become chains just as surely as gratitude can become obligation. What does that mean? Marcus asks, surprised by how steady his voice sounds. What do you want from me? Tank and the others exchange glances. The kind of wordless communication that develops between men who face danger together, who've learned to trust each other with their lives. Right now, nothing. Tank says, you go back to whatever life you were living before yesterday. You finish school. You make something of yourself. You become whoever you're supposed to become. But if you ever need us, if someone's giving you trouble, if you're in a jam you can't handle on your own, if the world decides to kick you when you're down, you find a way to get word to us, we'll be there. The promise settles into Marcus's chest like warmth spreading through cold water. Because for the first time in his life, someone is offering him unconditional backup. No questions asked, no strings attached, except the understanding that some debts can never be fully repaid. The sun has moved across the sky by the time Marcus walks out of Betty's diner. And the world looks different now, not changed, Exactly, but viewed through a lens that makes everything sharper, more significant, heavy with possibility. The leather jackets and rumbling motorcycles are gone, disappeared back to whatever lives these men lead when they're not sitting in small town diners making promises to homeless teenagers. But their words echo in Marcus's head like a song he can't stop humming. Tank had pressed a business card into his hand before leaving, just a phone number and the words Rod Motorcycles embossed in simple black letters, and told him to keep it somewhere safe, somewhere he'd remember to look if the world ever got too heavy to carry alone. Marcus walks back toward the highway, but instead of continuing his endless journey to nowhere, he finds himself turning toward town, toward the modest neighborhoods he'd passed through that morning, when everything was different, when he was still just a kid with nothing to lose, because he'd never had anything worth keeping. The group home is still 12 miles behind him, but for the first time, that distance feels like something that could be crossed rather than an unbridged gable chasm between his past and his future. He thinks about Ms. Patterson's tired voice saying, "Maybe it's just not working out." Marcus realizes that maybe she was right, but not in the way she meant. The walk gives him time to think, to process the enormity of what's happened in the last 24 hours, to understand that sometimes salvation comes wearing leather jackets and riding motorcycles, speaking in growly voices about loyalty and brotherhood, and debts that bind strangers together, across lines that society says shouldn't be crossed. He thinks about Hawk lying on that highway, blood in his beard and determination in his gaze, looking at Marcus like he was someone who mattered, someone worth remembering. He thinks about Tank's words, "We don't forget debts," and realizes that he's been given something he's never had before. The knowledge that someone has his back, that he's not walking through the world entirely alone anymore. The decision comes to him gradually, like sunrise spreading across a landscape, bringing clarity to shadows that had seemed impenetrable in the darkness. He finds a pay phone outside a convenience store, an ancient relic that somehow still works when he feeds at quarters, and dials the number for the group home that he's memorized despite trying to forget it. Ms. Patterson's voice sounds surprised when she hears his name, then cautious, then something that might be relieved. "Marcus, where are you? Everyone's been worried sick." The concern in her voice catches him off guard because he spent so long thinking of himself as just another problem to be managed that he'd forgotten people might actually worry when he disappeared. "I'm okay," Marcus says, watching traffic flow past on the street beyond the phone booth. "I'm safe and I think I'm ready to come back, but things need to be different. I need things to be different." The conversation that follows is longer and more complicated than he'd expected, full of questions and explanations and negotiations about second chances and fresh starts and what it means to give someone another opportunity to belong somewhere. By the time he hangs up, the sun is setting again, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that remind him of hope and possibility and the way forward. Paths look when you're finally ready to walk them. The ride back to the group home comes courtesy of Ms. Patterson herself, who drives the 43 miles in her ancient Honda Civic while asking careful questions about where he's been and what he's learned and whether he thinks he can make it work this time. Marcus finds himself telling her about stopping to help an injured motorcyclist, about learning that sometimes doing the right thing brings unexpected rewards, about understanding that family isn't always about blood or legal documents, but sometimes about choosing to show up for people when they need you most. He doesn't mention the Hells Angels or the promises made in chrome and vinyl diners, because some stories are too big and too private to share with people who wouldn't understand. Walking back into Riverside feels like putting on clothes that almost fit. Not perfect, but familiar enough to be comfortable with. Room to grow into something better. Dererick is there sullen and suspicious. But Marcus finds that the other boys Hostility bounces off him, like rain off a leather jacket because he knows something Dererick doesn't know. Carries something Dererick can't touch. The card in his pocket feels like a talisman. A reminder that somewhere out there, men with motorcycles and tattoos consider him family, consider his well-being their responsibility. That night, lying in the narrow bed that smells like industrial detergent and broken dreams, Marcus stares at the ceiling and thinks about roads that lead toward futures instead of away from pasts, about the difference between running and choosing direction, about the sound of motorcycle engines and the weight of promises made by people who understand that some debts can only be repaid by living well. The photograph of his mother, creased and faded from years of carrying, sits on the nightstand beside his bed, and for the first time in longer than he can remember, he looks at it without feeling the crushing weight of everything he's lost. Instead, he sees possibilities stretching ahead of him like an open highway filled with destinations he hasn't imagined yet, people he hasn't met, versions of himself he hasn't discovered. Somewhere across town, Hawk is probably lying in a hospital bed, healing from his encounter with physics and asphalt, maybe thinking about the skinny kid who stopped to help when he could have kept walking. Somewhere else, Tank and the others are living lives that Marcus can only guess at, carrying on traditions and loyalties that stretch back decades, knowing that they've added another name to their list of people worth protecting. And here in this place, that's not quite home, but might become something close to it. Marcus Delano falls asleep with a business card pressed between his palm and his pillow, dreaming of open roads and the sound of engines roaring toward tomorrow, carrying him toward a future that finally feels like something worth reaching for, something worth the walk.